The night sky above the shattered planet flickered like an ancient memory, dim stars barely visible through the heavy veil of cosmic dust. THANOS stood alone on the jagged peak of what was once a thriving world, now a graveyard of forgotten gods and broken timelines. The ground beneath him was scorched, cracked, as though the very fabric of reality had been torn apart and left to wither. Silence reigned, a deep, suffocating silence that stretched for miles. Then, the silence broke. A streak of green and purple crashed through the sky, an explosion of light and debris. The crater it left was deep, its edges glowing with residual energy as the figure that had fallen within struggled to rise. She-Hulk, Jen Walters. Her body was battered, a twisted mess of bruises and blood-stained green flesh. Her breathing was ragged, every breath a jagged pull of air through torn lungs. THANOS did not move at first. He observed her through the haze, his cold gaze unwavering. The world around him had nothing left to offer. Not to him, not to anyone. He had already outlived his war, his purpose long forgotten in the ashes of what remained. And yet, here she was, this hero from another world, a force of strength and will, now broken and vulnerable in his domain. Jen tried to stand, her knees buckling beneath her as she collapsed again, her hands pushing weakly against the scorched earth. She let out a sound, a low, strained groan, as the pain seared through her body. She was alone. No allies, no friends, only the endless void of space, the weight of her survival crushing her. And then, as if by instinct, a shadow loomed over her, a giant. THANOS, the Mad Titan. He towered above her, his massive form casting a dark silhouette against the dying stars. He did not speak at first. There was no need for words. His presence alone was enough to freeze her in place, a cold, suffocating aura that threatened to swallow her. She-Hulk's eyes flickered up, her gaze filled with equal parts defiance and exhaustion. "I'm not dead yet," she rasped, her voice strained but still strong. "You're not the first to think I'd just break that easily." THANOS knelt down beside her, his movements slow and deliberate, as though he had all the time in the universe to make his decision. His gaze never left hers, unwavering, the weight of centuries reflected in the depth of his eyes. There was no pity there, only something darker, something ancient. A recognition. "You are not the first to fall," he replied, his voice low and rumbling, like distant thunder. "But you may be the last to rise." Jen winced as she tried to move, her arms trembling with the effort. But the pain was too much. Her vision blurred, the edges of reality bending and warping. She felt herself slipping away, the coldness of unconsciousness pulling at her like a siren's call. Before she could lose herself completely, she felt his hand, a massive, warm force, on her shoulder. It was not an act of kindness, but of necessity. THANOS lifted her with ease, cradling her in his arms as though she weighed nothing. The touch was strange, unexpected. She had never thought the Mad Titan capable of something so human. "You're not the first," he said again, his voice softer now, almost contemplative. "And you will not be the last." Jen's mind was spinning, every fiber of her being screaming for freedom, for escape. But there was nowhere left to run. Only this dark god who had given her something she had lost long ago. Safety. In the silence that followed, she allowed herself one brief moment of peace. Her head rested against his chest, the rhythmic beat of his heart, a strange, comforting contrast to the storm raging within her. And somewhere, deep within the ruins of her spirit, a question began to take root. Could she trust him? Could she let herself feel safe in his arms? Or was she simply another lost soul in his endless collection of casualties? The stars above them flickered once more, and for the first time in an eternity, THANOS did not feel so alone. Time had become meaningless in the days that followed. The air around them was thick with the scent of scorched earth and the crackle of static energy. THANOS's citadel, perched atop the ruins of an ancient world, was a place of haunting beauty. Its shattered towers seemed to reach for the heavens, as though mourning the lost eras of a forgotten cosmos. The walls were adorned with relics of the past, relics that had once belonged to gods, kings, and conquerors. Now, they were nothing more than reminders of the emptiness left in their wake. Jen stood at the edge of the citadel, looking out across the wasteland. Her body had healed, but her mind was still fractured, 1,000 thoughts pulling her in every direction. She felt like a stranger in her own skin, both a warrior and a prisoner. Her green skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, and though the stars above flickered like dying embers, she could not shake the feeling that she was caught in an endless night. Are you planning to stare at the horizon forever? Thanos' voice broke through her reverie, low and commanding. She turned to face him. He stood in the shadows, his towering figure a dark silhouette against the eerie glow of the citadel's crumbling architecture. His presence was immense, impossible to ignore. And yet there was something different in the way he looked at her now. It was not the cold, detached gaze of a conqueror. It was something deeper, something more complicated. "I was thinking," she replied, her voice steady despite the tumult inside her. "Thinking about what happens next." Thanos stepped forward, the weight of his footsteps reverberating through the broken stone beneath him. He stopped just a few paces away from her, his eyes never leaving hers. There was an unspoken understanding between them, an understanding forged in the fire of their shared isolation. Neither of them had ever asked for this moment, this strange, fragile bond that had begun to grow between them. But it was there, undeniable and real. "The next step is always the same," Thanos said, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. "Survival. You do not survive by waiting for fate to come for you. You make your own fate. You bend the universe to your will." Jen looked at him, her eyes narrowing. "And how do you plan to do that?" "Destroy everything. Burn it all down until there's nothing left." He was silent for a moment, his gaze shifting to the distant stars, as though searching for something beyond the reach of mortal comprehension. Perhaps, perhaps not. But there is power in destruction, just as there is power in creation. Sometimes you must break everything in order to build something stronger. She frowned, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Sounds like a great way to make enemies." "Enemies are a matter of perspective," Thanos replied, his voice unwavering. "What is an enemy but a force that resists your will? And what is love but the willingness to fight for something, someone, against all odds?" Jen's breath caught in her chest. The words hung between them, thick and heavy, as if they had just opened a door to something neither of them was fully prepared to face. "What are you asking, Thanos?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. For the first time, a flicker of something softer passed across his face, a brief, fleeting moment of vulnerability that was quickly masked by the weight of his stoic nature. He stepped closer, his massive form casting a shadow over her as he took her hand in his. "You owe me nothing," Thanos said, his voice low but resolute. "But I will not stand by and watch the universe tear itself apart. If you are to stay, you must make a choice. Stay and fight, or leave and let everything fall." Jen met his gaze, her pulse quickening. There was something more in his eyes now, something raw, something that mirrored her own inner turmoil. She had come here as a survivor, desperate for respite, but now she felt something stirring within her. Something dangerous, something that could change everything. A silence stretched between them, the weight of their shared decision hanging in the air. "I will stay," she said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. Thanos nodded once, a brief, almost imperceptible movement. "Then we fight together." And beneath the ruins of forgotten gods, beneath the weight of the stars themselves, they forged a pact that would bind them together in ways neither of them could fully understand. They were two warriors, cast into the dark, ready to bend fate to their will. Together, the days blurred into each other as Thanos and Jen fought side by side. They weren't just allies anymore. They were something more. Two forces drawn together by circumstance, bound by shared purpose. Yet, amid the raging chaos, something else simmered beneath the surface, something neither could deny, but neither could fully understand. The Citadel, once a place of cold, empty solitude for THANOS, now felt alive. Every corner echoed with the weight of their decisions, their unspoken bond. The air between them crackled with tension, the silence often louder than any words they exchanged. There was a strange stillness in the way they moved together, a seamless synchronization born of necessity, but growing into something far deeper. Jen stood before the ancient forge, the flames casting flickering shadows across her face. Her arms were bare, the green skin still bruised from their earlier battles, yet her strength was undeniable. The heat from the forge warmed her, but it was not the heat of the fire that caused the quickening of her breath. It was the presence behind her. THANOS stood in the doorway, his massive frame silhouetted against the backdrop of the crumbling ruins. His gaze, as always, was cold, impenetrable. But she knew him now. She knew the weight that pressed down on him, the burden of a lifetime of choices and consequences. He was not just the mad titan. He was a prisoner of his own making. And somehow so was she. Jen turned, locking eyes with him. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his posture, something small, but significant, that told her he wasn't simply watching her. He was waiting for something. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. It was just them, alone in the vastness of the ruined citadel, with nothing but the crackling fire to fill the silence. Jen's heart thundered in her chest, a primal rhythm that matched the pulse of the universe itself. She had never imagined being here, standing before this monstrous, conflicted being, sharing not just a battlefield, but something even more dangerous, an unspoken connection. Without a word, she stepped toward him, her breath steady despite the storm raging inside her. THANOS didn't move, but his eyes followed her every step, his gaze never faltering. She could feel the weight of his presence as she closed the distance between them. For a moment, she hesitated, just inches from him. But then she reached up, her hand trembling slightly as it brushed against his armored chest. It was a simple touch, but it was everything. The warmth of his body was strange to her, unexpected. She had imagined THANOS as nothing more than a force of destruction, a being made of cold, unyielding rage. But standing this close to him, she realized something different. Beneath the armor, beneath the power and the terror, there was something more human. Something that ached, something that longed. THANOS inhaled sharply, his chest rising and falling with a deep breath. For a moment, he didn't speak. Instead, he allowed the touch to linger, his massive hand moving to rest gently on her shoulder. The gesture was not one of control or dominance, but something far more subtle. Protection, perhaps. Understanding. "You are not the first to stand before me, Jen Walters," he said, his voice softer now, a rare note of vulnerability creeping through the usual rumbling depths. "But you are the first to see me as I am, beyond the destruction, beyond the madness." Jen's heart clenched, her throat tightening as the weight of his words hit her. She had seen him, really seen him, since the moment he saved her life. Not the conqueror, not the destroyer, but the man, the being who had lived through eons of pain and loss, a being who carried the scars of 1,000 lifetimes. She saw the monster, yes, but she also saw the man beneath. "You're not a monster, THANOS," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "Not to me." The words hung in the air, suspended in the silence that followed. Jen felt the shift in the air around them, a tremor of something unspoken. THANOS's grip on her shoulder tightened slightly, a gesture so small, so fleeting, yet it carried a weight that felt like an eternity. She stepped back, her breath coming faster now, her pulse racing in a way she couldn't ignore. She wasn't sure what had just happened or why her heart was pounding so hard, but the intensity between them was undeniable. The warmth of his touch lingered on her skin, a reminder of something deeper, something dangerous that neither of them could run from. The night stretched on, And as the flames danced in the forge, both of them stood in the quiet aftermath of their own shared vulnerability. The bond between them was no longer just about survival. It was about something much more dangerous, something that neither of them could escape. The Citadel was alive with tension, the kind that surged through the air like a storm waiting to break. Thanos and Jen had been fighting together for months now, their alliance forged in the heat of battle and solidified in the quiet spaces between. But tonight, something felt different. Tonight, the universe was watching, waiting for the inevitable clash of titanic forces. Above them, the sky was bruised with the blood-red glow of the blood moon, its light casting eerie shadows across the broken world. The stars themselves seemed to shudder in its presence. For the first time, Jen felt the weight of it, not just the cosmic significance of the event, but the personal weight of the choice she had to make. They stood together on the balcony of the Citadel, overlooking the vast expanse of nothingness. Below them, the remnants of worlds long forgotten lay in silence. The winds howled, carrying with them whispers of doomed futures and impossible destinies. Jen could hear them, the voices of the fallen, of the lost souls that had paid the price for their decisions. Thanos stood beside her, unmoving as ever. His presence was a quiet storm, a force of nature that no one could hope to control. But tonight, his silence felt different. Tonight, he was waiting. Jen turned to him, her heart racing in her chest. The pull between them had grown stronger with each passing day, each shared battle, each fleeting moment of intimacy. She could feel it, even now. The electric tension in the air, the way his eyes seemed to burn with something she could not name. "I can't keep doing this, Thanos," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but it was sharp, full of the raw emotion she had been holding back for so long. "I can't keep pretending that this is just about survival. It's not. It's more. And I can't ignore it anymore." Thanos did not turn to face her immediately. He stared out at the crimson sky, his expression unreadable. But she knew him now, knew that every decision, every word he spoke, carried the weight of 1,000 lifetimes. "You think I don't feel it too?" he replied, his voice low, rumbling like distant thunder. "You think I don't see what's between us, what we've become?" Jen's breath hitched in her throat. The words were there, hanging in the air between them, but neither of them could say them aloud. What was this? A bond forged in battle, or something more? Something that neither of them could control, something that defied the universe they were bound to. "Then why are we still standing here?" Jen asked, her voice cracking with a mixture of frustration and fear. "Why don't you just let me go?" Thanos finally turned to her, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. For a moment, there was nothing, just the vastness of the universe around them, the silence, the blood-red moon hanging low in the sky. "Because we have nothing left but each other," he said, his words a quiet, haunting truth. "We've made our choices. Now we have to live with them." Jen felt the weight of his words, the finality of them. There was no turning back now. No running. No escape. The universe had brought them together, and now it was demanding their allegiance. A flash of fire lit the horizon, an attack from the enemy they had long fought to silence. But it wasn't just an attack. It was a declaration, a warning. Someone somewhere had decided their union was too dangerous to leave unchecked. And now they were coming for them. Jen's hands clenched into fists. The decision had been made for them. She could feel the heat of the incoming attack, the thrum of energy pulsing through the ground beneath them. The war was not over. It was only beginning. Thanos' eyes gleamed with a cold fire as he stepped forward, his massive form towering over her. "This is what we are, Jen," he said, his voice a promise and a challenge. "We fight for each other. We fight for our world. And when the universe demands our blood, we will give it." Jen nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Then we fight together. To the end. And under the shadow of the blood moon, with the weight of their decisions pressing down on them. They made an oath, a blood oath, sealed not in words but in the fire of battle and the unbreakable bond between them. The enemy was coming, but so were they. Together, forever. The war had begun. The battlefield stretched before Jen and Thanos like a dark, unforgiving sea of fire and destruction. The stars above, once distant and serene, now seemed to pulse with an angry, violent energy, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Thunder crackled through the air, and the ground shook beneath their feet. There was no time for hesitation, no room for second thoughts. The enemy was upon them. Jen's muscles tensed as she stood alongside Thanos, her fists clenched in anticipation. The winds whipped her hair around her face, her green skin glowing faintly in the twilight. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She was ready for this. She had to be. Thanos stood beside her, his massive form a dark silhouette against the backdrop of burning skies. The mad titan had always been a force of nature, unstoppable, ruthless. But tonight, there was something different in his eyes, something uncertain. They both knew this battle would change everything. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something deeper, for each other, for a future they had yet to define. The ground trembled again as the enemy forces made their presence known. A horde of ships descended from the sky, their engines roaring like a swarm of deadly locusts. Each ship was a weapon of destruction, its hulls bristling with dark energy. Jen felt the familiar surge of rage rise within her. She had fought in countless battles, but this one felt different. This time, the stakes were higher. This time, she had more to lose. Thanos moved first, his massive fist crashing into the nearest ship with the force of a collapsing star. The ship disintegrated into a cloud of fire and debris, but that was just the beginning. The rest of the fleet descended, surrounding them like a swarm of ravenous predators. Jen surged forward, her body a blur of green fury. She smashed through the ranks of enemy soldiers, her fists tearing through armor and bone with terrifying ease. Each blow was a release, each punch a battle cry. The world around her seemed to slow as she became a whirlwind of destruction, a force of nature unleashed. But even in the midst of the chaos, her thoughts kept drifting back to Thanos. She could feel him beside her, his presence undeniable. He was a force of nature, unstoppable, powerful, but she could sense a change in him. The way he moved, the way he fought beside her, it was different. There was an unspoken understanding between them now. They were no longer just allies. They were something more. And it terrified her. The battle raged on, the clash of weapons and the roar of explosions filling the air. But Jen couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to shift. The enemy was relentless, but so were they. And yet, as the battle wore on, she began to sense the first cracks in the foundation they had built together, the first whispers of doubt. Thanos was untouchable, his power unmatched, but even he seemed to hesitate. It was small, imperceptible, but Jen noticed it. The way he paused before each strike, the way his gaze flickered toward her when the enemy pressed too close. She saw it, the weight of everything pressing down on him. The responsibility, the burden of leadership, the cost of everything they had chosen to become. Jen moved closer to him, her heart pounding as she tore through another wave of attackers. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Thanos wasn't invincible. He was just as lost, just as uncertain as she was. They were both running on fumes, fueled by their shared purpose, their shared pain, but still fragile. "Thanos," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We can't keep doing this alone. You don't have to carry all of this on your own." His gaze snapped to her, his expression hard, unreadable, but in his eyes she saw the truth. He was as afraid as she was, as unsure. The weight of the universe was too much for any one person to bear, even him. "I never said I was alone," he replied, his voice low and steady, the weight of 1,000 years of existence in every word. Jen's heart twisted. She knew what he was saying, even without the words. They had been alone for too long, both of them. But together, they were something different. Together, they were more than just survivors. They were a force that could change the universe. And that's when it happened. A blast of energy, brighter and more destructive than anything they had faced before, ripped through the sky. It struck the ground between them, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. Jen and Thanos were thrown to the ground, the world spinning around them. Jen's body ached, the air knocked from her lungs, but she could feel Thanos beside her, his presence grounding her. They weren't finished yet. They had fought this far. Together, the world seemed to fracture in the wake of the blast. Thanos and Jen were both on their feet in an instant, the chaotic roar of the battle fading into the background as the full weight of the attack settled in. The ground around them was cracked, the air thick with the scent of burning metal and the acrid taste of ozone. From the distance, the enemy forces regrouped, their shadows gathering like an ominous storm, but it was the crackling silence between Jen and Thanos that felt the most deafening. Jen's heart raced as she surveyed the battlefield. The blood moon still hung in the sky, its ominous glow lighting up the wreckage around them. The attack had thrown the enemies into disarray, but now they were regrouping, becoming more coordinated, more determined. They were learning, adapting to the storm Jen and Thanos had unleashed. She turned to Thanos. His armor was scorched, his once imposing figure now marked by the brutal reality of the war they were waging. There was no arrogance in his gaze now, no certainty. He looked human, vulnerable in a way that unsettled her, a flicker of something unspoken lingering in his eyes. "We're not winning this battle," Jen said, her voice tight with urgency. "Not like this." Thanos' eyes burned with quiet rage, a spark of defiance flaring in the depths of his gaze. But he didn't respond right away. Instead, he lifted his hand, clenched into a fist, and the ground trembled beneath them. His powers surged, lightning crackling from his fingertips, a visible manifestation of his fury. Yet it wasn't just the power of destruction he wielded. Jen could feel it, a deep, gnawing pain hidden behind the storm of energy. "We don't have to win." Thanos finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "We just need to survive long enough for them to understand what it means to challenge us." Jen's brow furrowed. His words held truth, but they also held something darker, a weariness that echoed within her chest. She had fought beside him, shared battles and victories, but this endless struggle was taking its toll. On both of them, her fists clenched tighter. They were fighters, yes, but they were also more than that. They were the remnants of a broken universe, each carrying a burden too heavy for one soul to bear. She had tried to ignore it, tried to focus only on the mission. But now, standing in the heart of the chaos, she saw it clearly. Neither of them could continue down this path without breaking. "I won't let this destroy us," she said, her voice cutting through the dust-filled air. Her words weren't just a promise. They were a warning. Thanos turned to her, the weight of his gaze locking with hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of distant explosions seemed to fade into the background as they stood in that space, just the two of them, the universe swirling around them, poised on the edge of something irreparable. "You have no idea how much I've already lost," Thanos said, his voice low, vulnerable, for once unguarded. This war, this universe, none of it matters if I lose you." Jen's heart clenched. She wanted to argue, to say that they couldn't afford to get distracted, to focus on the war at hand. But the truth was, she knew, she had already lost pieces of herself in this battle, pieces that might never be found again. The moment was broken by a sudden, thunderous crash, a sound that shook them both back into reality. The enemy had made their move, attacking with a renewed ferocity. The battlefield exploded back into chaos, the roar of weapons, the clash of forces, overwhelming all other sounds. Jen's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't hesitate. She rushed forward, her body a blur of green fury, as she tore through the enemy ranks. She fought not just for survival, but for something more now. For the fragile bond between her and Thanos that had begun to form, something neither of them could run from. Thanos followed her, his massive figure crashing through the chaos with brutal precision. His strikes were devastating, his power unstoppable, but his movements were slower now, weighed down by something deeper, something personal, something Jen couldn't name. They fought together, side by side, like they always had. But this time, Jen felt the shift in the air between them. The way their movements were more in sync, more fluid, the way their eyes met across the battlefield, sharing a quiet understanding that went beyond words. The enemy forces were many, but they were losing ground. Jen and Thanos weren't just warriors anymore. They were a force of nature. Together, they were unstoppable. Yet, as the battle raged on, Jen couldn't help but wonder, would this war break them, or bring them closer together? In the heart of the storm, she had no answers, only the fight. And for now, that was enough. The universe had narrowed into a single burning point of destruction. Nothing mattered now but the battle, the war that stretched endlessly before them, the cost of survival weighing heavier with each passing second. The enemy had gathered their strength, their numbers overwhelming. But Jen and Thanos were undeterred, two warriors standing tall against the onslaught, bound together by more than just shared bloodshed. Thanos' eyes scanned the horizon, his face stoic, his thoughts a mystery even to Jen, who had come to understand him in ways no one else could. His power was unmatched, but there was a cost to everything. Jen saw it in the tension of his shoulders, in the quiet moments when he wasn't battling. It was a deep sorrow that threatened to break him, a sorrow that matched the devastation around them. Jen stood beside him, her chest heaving as she prepared for the next wave. She was bruised, battered, but still burning with the fire of defiance. Every punch, every kick, was a declaration that she was not going to back down. She would fight for herself, for them, for a future they had yet to fully understand. But tonight felt different. The air was thick with anticipation, the ground beneath their feet trembling with the energy of the forces gathered against them. This wasn't just another battle, it was the final confrontation. The enemy moved in, their weapons shining under the blood-red glow of the moon. Their leader, a towering figure cloaked in shadow, stepped forward, his voice booming across the battlefield. "This ends tonight, Thanos. You and your companion are a blight upon the galaxy. You will be erased from existence." Jen's heart skipped a beat at the mention of her name. The weight of the words felt like a physical blow. She had never been anything but a weapon, until now, until Thanos had shown her that there was more to life than just surviving, more than just fighting. Thanos' expression remained unreadable, but the intensity in his eyes spoke volumes. He was prepared. He had been prepared for this moment his entire life. "We shall see," he muttered, his voice like gravel, low and resonant with power. In a flash, he surged forward, his massive form becoming a blur of motion as he clashed with the enemy leader. The ground buckled beneath them as they collided, a violent shockwave rippling outward, sending soldiers scattering in all directions. Thanos moved with the brutal grace of a storm, each strike a calculated, devastating blow. Jen didn't hesitate. She leaped into the fray, her body a blur of green fury as she tore through the enemy ranks. Her fists were like hammers, smashing through the soldiers' defenses with terrifying precision. But as the battle raged around her, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The enemy was relentless, too well coordinated. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a war of attrition, and they were losing. She glanced over at Thanos. He was locked in combat, his every move a study in destruction. But even he couldn't be everywhere at once. The enemy was beginning to overwhelm them, pushing them back with relentless force. The weight of their numbers was beginning to take its toll. Jen could feel the strain in her muscles, the fatigue beginning to set in. But she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when they had come this far. Suddenly, A blinding light erupted from the enemy's ranks, a weapon of unimaginable power. It tore through the battlefield like a wave of destruction, slamming into THANOS and sending him sprawling across the ground. Jen's heart leaped into her throat as she watched him fall, his massive form crashing to the earth with a deafening roar. "No!" Jen shouted, her voice raw with desperation. Without thinking, she launched herself forward, ignoring the growing pain in her body, the exhaustion pulling at her every step. She reached THANOS just as the enemy closed in, their weapons raised to finish him off. But Jen wasn't going to let that happen. She wasn't going to lose him. With a battle cry, she slammed into the enemy forces, her fists tearing through them with wild fury. She was no longer thinking. She was pure instinct. Every punch was a promise. Every strike was a plea. She wasn't just fighting for her life. She was fighting for him. As the last of the enemy forces fell before her, Jen turned back to THANOS, her breath ragged. He was slowly rising, shaking off the impact of the blast, his eyes blazing with fury. "You can't defeat me," THANOS growled, his voice dark and dangerous. Jen offered him a hand, her green skin glowing in the dim light. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, they stood side by side, not just warriors, but something more, something that defied the odds, that defied everything they had been taught to believe. Together, they could face anything. And as the blood moon hung above them, casting its crimson light over the battlefield, Jen knew one thing for sure. The battle had ended, but the cost was undeniable. The last of the enemy forces had been scattered, their shadows retreating into the vast expanse of space. The once thriving battlefield lay in ruins, the debris and destruction a haunting reminder of the war they had fought. But through it all, Jen and THANOS stood together, standing as one, though each of them carried the weight of the universe in their souls. Jen's body ached from the endless fight, her green skin marked by the scars of battle, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. The air around them was thick with the heavy scent of smoke and the distant crackle of dying fires. But amidst the ruin, there was a stillness, a quiet that hadn't existed in what felt like forever. She turned to THANOS, her heart hammering in her chest as she watched him. He had been her enemy once, the mad titan who had ravaged planets, who had brought chaos and destruction in his wake. Yet now, standing here beside him, she saw something else, something softer. The force of nature that had been so unyielding now seemed fragile. There was a quiet strength in him that Jen had never known was there, a vulnerability that mirrored her own. THANOS's gaze met hers, and for a brief moment, they shared something unspoken. It was not just the battle they had fought together that connected them now. It was the understanding that they had both carried burdens too heavy for anyone to bear, and now, somehow, they had shared that weight. "We've won," Jen said, her voice quieter now, the words carrying the weight of all they had endured. THANOS nodded, though his expression remained unreadable. The mad titan, ever the strategist, was already looking beyond the present, but even he could not deny the significance of the moment. They had done what no one thought possible. Together, they had turned the tide. "Victory is not the end," THANOS said, his voice low and heavy with truth. "It's just the beginning." Jen's brow furrowed, her curiosity piqued by the way he spoke. She had always known him as a man of action, a conqueror, not a visionary. But now, there was something different in him. He wasn't just focused on power or dominance. He was looking ahead, toward something more. "You don't mean," she began, but she trailed off, not sure how to ask the question that hung in the air between them. How could they move forward after all that had happened? How could they build something new when everything they had known had been torn apart? THANOS turned to face her fully, his imposing form casting a long shadow in the dying light. He seemed different, less like the cold conqueror he had once been, more like a man who had seen the fragility of his own existence. "We cannot undo the past," he said softly, his voice tinged with regret. "But we can build something from the ashes, together." Jen's heart fluttered at his words. There was a promise in them, one that echoed deep within her. The past was a weight they both carried, but perhaps, just perhaps, they could move forward from it, together. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding that their fight was over. But their journey had only just begun. The blood moon above them finally began to fade, its crimson light softening, giving way to the gentle glow of the coming dawn. The stars in the sky, once so distant and unreachable, now seemed closer, within their grasp. Jen glanced toward the horizon, the first light of dawn breaking through the dark clouds. The world was scared, yes, but it was not beyond saving. They had survived, and as the sunlight touched the earth below them, Jen knew that they were more than just survivors. They were the architects of a new beginning. THANOS stood beside her, and for the first time, Jen didn't feel alone. In that moment, she knew they were no longer bound by the chains of the past. They were free, free to create something new, something better, from the ruins of the old world. Together, they would face whatever came next. The universe was vast, and its future uncertain, but Jen and THANOS had a chance now, a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to write a new story, one where their bond was the foundation. As the sun rose, its golden rays washing over them, Jen took a step forward, her hand reaching out toward THANOS. He hesitated for only a moment before he reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. And in that touch, in that simple connection, they found their answer. Together, they would face the future. Together, they would change the universe.